The Earth Defense Coalition, EDC, was a fractured alliance of nations, often more known for internal bickering than for military might. But now, under the looming shadow of an alien invasion, humanity had no choice but to unite. The first signal of the Concorde's approach came not through a declaration, but through the unsettling silence of space, the deep hum of their ships as they entered the solar system, their arrival predicted by Earth's long-range sensors, but understood too late by the governments that had scoffed at the idea of interstellar warfare. General Mbeki, once a rising star in the United Nations peacekeeping forces, now found herself thrust into the role of humanity's last line of defense. The coalition had given her command, but she was more than just a soldier. She was a strategist, a woman who saw patterns in chaos, and who knew, deep in her bones, that the invaders underestimated humanity. This was not a species accustomed to defeat. Not in spirit, not in soul. Mbeki stood in front of a holographic map projected across the command center of Earth's central military hub. It showed the incoming Concorde fleet, their ships massive and impervious-looking. Weapons systems designed to wipe out planets. The invaders had already neutralized the first wave of humanity's outlying defenses with surgical precision. Earth's militaries had barely had time to mobilize. "General," a voice called behind her. She turned to see Admiral Noah Zhao approach, tall, composed, his face a mask of calm, though his eyes revealed the strain of the last few hours. He handed her a datapad, the latest intel. "The first wave of Concorde ships has begun deploying their shock sphere," he said, his voice clipped. "Their fleet is stationed just beyond Mars' orbit, moving into position for the first strike. Estimated time to impact, 15 minutes. Mbeki took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The shock sphere, a Concorde tactic designed to decimate any resistance before the enemy could even mount a counterattack. It was a calculated strike, and no one had ever survived one. The calculation was clear. Humanity would fold, and the planet would be claimed without a fight. The problem, though, was that humanity was fighting. "I've already sent the orders," she replied, turning back to the map. "We're not going to let them dictate our future. Zhao, get me the fleet on standby. I want every orbital defense platform operational, and make sure the civilians have time to evacuate. The first strike won't be the last." Zhao gave a single nod, but as he turned to leave, Mbeki's voice stopped him. "One more thing," she said. "We're not just going to win this war with weapons, we're going to outthink them. We'll do what they never expected. We'll break their doctrines." He paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "You think we can beat them at their own game?" Mbeki smiled grimly. "If we can't, then we'll change the rules." The Concorde fleet loomed, the shadow of their impending strike cutting through the darkness of space. For most of Earth's military commanders, it was already too late. But Mbeki knew something they didn't. Humans never fought the way others expected. They had no perfect tactics, no immaculate plans, but they had something better, the sheer will to survive. The countdown had begun, and Earth's first true battle had just started. The first wave hit Mars with a devastating force. The Concorde's shock sphere was deployed as expected, a rapid bombardment of kinetic energy weapons designed to obliterate anything in its path. Mars, with its thin atmosphere and sprawling industrial zones, was supposed to be an easy target for the invaders. The Concorde had calculated its strike to be over in hours, leaving the rest of humanity too shattered to resist. But as the Concorde fleet descended on the red planet, something unexpected happened. Mbeki had been watching the live feed from the Martian defense perimeter when a sudden, sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "General, we've got incoming, unexpected incoming," said Captain Lila Drake, one of Mbeki's top commanders. Her face appeared on the screen, panic flashing in her eyes. "Report, Captain," Mbeki responded, keeping her voice steady. "We've identified a fleet of small civilian ships, freighters, mining vessels, anything that can fly, launching from Mars," Drake continued. It's not just military. It's everyone. They're attacking the Concorde. The disbelief in her voice was palpable. The Concorde's fleet was designed to deal with military precision. These were no warriors. They were miners, engineers, farmers, and they were charging headfirst into the might of the Concorde with nothing but their desperation and a handful of rudimentary weapons. Mbiki's lips tightened into a grim smile. Let them charge. From Mars' surface, a chaotic cloud of ships, most of them not even equipped for battle, began their desperate assault on the invaders. Some of them fired improvised weapons, sending projectiles at the Concorde fleet. Others acted as decoys, weaving in and out of the Concorde's targeting range, confusing the enemy sensors. It was nothing short of madness. But that madness had a certain method to it. With each hit and each narrowly avoided blast, the Concorde's tactical formation began to fracture. They were used to cold, calculated combat. No room for surprises. No room for humans. Meanwhile, General Mbiki watched the mayhem unfold through the secure connection to the Martian command center. The Concorde had expected to deal with a clean strike, but this chaos was throwing them off balance. A voice broke through her momentary distraction. General, the EDC fleet is in position. We're ready to intercept the enemy's secondary strike wave. Mbiki turned to Zhao, who had just entered the room. Let's show them what we can do, she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of unyielding resolve. Zhao nodded and passed the command over to the fleet. The human forces, still outgunned and underprepared, initiated their counterattack. It was as unorthodox as anything Earth had ever done. A series of sudden, sharp movements designed to overwhelm the Concorde's perfect formations. Move them in now, Mbeki ordered. Don't wait for a perfect strike. Don't give them time to react. The human fleet surged forward, catching the Concorde off guard. Using asteroids and space debris, they created a labyrinth of potential traps, forcing the alien ships into a chaotic, unpredictable engagement. But the human ships weren't looking for conventional victory. They didn't need to win. Not yet. All they needed to do was buy time, disrupt the enemy, and prove something the Concorde couldn't comprehend. Humanity's strength wasn't in the tools they had. It was in the will to fight. The battle escalated rapidly, turning the space around Mars into a chaotic battlefield of ships, debris, and firestorms. The Concorde retaliated, but every move they made was countered by human ingenuity and madness. Admiral Zhou's fleet, coordinated but never predictable, launched hit-and-run attacks, striking at the Concorde's vulnerable points, making use of everything at their disposal. Even cargo freighters, now retrofitted with weapons, caused havoc. One particularly reckless maneuver saw a civilian transport careen directly into a Concorde destroyer, its engines overloaded and acting as a bomb, taking the enemy vessel down with a catastrophic explosion. The Concorde commanders watched in disbelief as their doctrine began to collapse before their eyes. The aliens had thought humanity weak, scattered, unable to organize on a planetary scale. What they failed to understand was this: humans were imperfect, but in their imperfection, they thrived. They didn't need perfect strategies. They just needed the will to fight. Back in Earth's Central Command, Mbeki stood tall as reports flooded in. They had done the impossible. They had forced the Concorde to adapt, to react. The shockwave from the initial strike was far from over, but humanity had bought something far more precious than just time: a chance. The Concorde will learn, she said, voice firm. They'll learn that the human spirit can't be calculated. As the battle for Mars raged on, one thing was clear: humanity was no longer the underdog. The aftermath of the Battle of Mars left the Concorde reeling, but for humanity, it was only the beginning. The sudden and chaotic tactics that had thrown the invaders off balance had proven one undeniable truth: Earth's strength lay not in its ability to fight like the Concorde, but in its ability to think like no other species in the galaxy. General Mbeki, standing before a vast screen showing fragmented reports from all corners of the Earth Defense Coalition, knew that they couldn't win the war with brute force alone. The Concorde's technology was superior, their fleets vast. What Earth had was something far more dangerous: unpredictability, adaptability, and the relentless drive to survive. "Status report, Captain," Mbiki said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Captain Lila Drake, a steady and sharp-minded officer, responded, her voice calm despite the chaos they had just witnessed. "We've managed to scramble their comm systems temporarily, General. They're regrouping, recalibrating their tactics. They're frustrated, but it won't last. They're already planning another strike, a larger one this time." Mbiki turned to Admiral Zhao, who stood nearby, arms crossed, staring out of the large viewport where the remnants of Concorde ships drifted like ghosts in the Martian atmosphere. "We've disrupted them, but we need more than just chaos. We need a new doctrine. If we keep throwing the same attacks at them, they'll adapt faster than we can." Zhao nodded, "But we have no time to train a new force. They'll be back before we can fully regroup." "No," Mbiki replied, her voice gaining strength. "We don't need a new force. We need a new way of fighting. A way that doesn't give them time to react. A way that keeps them guessing. We need to exploit our greatest advantage, human ingenuity." The next few days were a blur of meetings, debates, and planning. Earth's scattered military forces were quickly pulled into a single unified chain of command. But Mbiki knew the real battle wasn't on the battlefield yet. It was in the minds of her commanders. The Concorde followed strict, predictable protocols. They valued order and efficiency, rules and precision. Humanity, on the other hand, thrived in the chaos of war, where anything could happen. She called it the Resolve Doctrine, a strategy based on constant disruption, unpredictability, and overwhelming the enemy with nonlinear tactics. The human forces would no longer rely on traditional military command or formation. Instead, they would attack the Concorde's weaknesses, their reliance on perfect order and precision. No two strikes would be the same. No fleet movement would follow a pattern. Every engagement would be designed to confuse, disorient, and frustrate. But there was something else Mbeki understood. The Concorde's ships were sophisticated, their weapons devastating. But humans had something the aliens could not replicate: creativity. And no amount of technology could predict the next move when it was created from desperation, resourcefulness, and raw human will. On the first day of training, Mbeki gathered her newly formed task force, a mix of military veterans, engineers, scientists, and even civilians who had volunteered. Their orders were simple: learn to think like a human. "You're not going to be soldiers," Mbeki told them. "You're going to be problem solvers. The Concorde follows rules, and we're going to break every single one of them. If you have an idea, no matter how insane it seems, we're going to try it." She spent the next several days drilling her commanders in chaos tactics, unconventional strategies designed to confuse the enemy, to hit them where they couldn't predict. In one exercise, they simulated a battle using holographic projections, but with no predetermined patterns. Every move was reactive, spontaneous. The first results were far from perfect. Some plans failed spectacularly. Others had unforeseen consequences, but Mbeki encouraged it all. Every mistake was an opportunity. Every failure was a lesson. And the more they practiced, the better they became at improvisation. Admiral Zhao, who had once believed that military success was about precision, found himself adapting to the new reality. "It's like we're playing a game with the Concorde," he said one evening, watching simulations on a screen. "They can't predict us. They can't control us." "Exactly," Mbeki replied, her tone resolute. "We don't just want to win. We want them to question everything they know." By the time the next Concorde fleet arrived, a far larger force this time, primed for retribution, humanity was ready. Earth's defenses were no longer static or conventional. They were alive, constantly shifting and changing with each encounter. The Concorde ships that once sailed through space with unchallenged authority now found themselves facing an enemy that was impossible to predict, a species that didn't follow the rules. And that, Mbeki knew, was their greatest weapon. Kleisen Theta was a vital strategic nexus for the Concorde, located at the intersection of several key trade routes. Its massive orbital station was considered impregnable, a fortress that no fleet had ever dared challenge. It housed a central command node for the entire Concorde fleet, and its defenses were legendary. Shields that could withstand a full assault from even the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. The Concorde's plan was simple: crush the last vestiges of humanity's resistance and use Kleisen Theta as a staging point for their final push to Earth. They had underestimated one thing: humans. General Mbeki stood on the command bridge of the EDC flagship Courage, her eyes fixed on the holo-display of Kleisen Theta. The Concorde fleet had arrived first, their ships arrayed in perfect formation, as always. But this time, Mbeki wasn't relying on calculated perfection. She wasn't even relying on her fleet's strength. She was relying on the chaos they had learned to embrace. "We know their weaknesses," Mbeki said to her gathered officers. "Kleisen Theta is a symbol of their doctrine. It's built on certainty, on order. We're going to destroy it by throwing every ounce of unpredictability at them. No pattern, no rhythm, just madness." Admiral Zhao, who had come to embrace the new strategy, nodded. "This is going to be messy, but it's the only way we stand a chance." The plan was simple in its audacity. They would lure the Concorde fleet into a trap, one that would make their precision tactics useless. The Courage and a small task force would draw the main Concorde fleet into the outer edges of the Kleisen system, where they would be scattered among asteroid fields, gravitational anomalies, and the wreckage of abandoned mining stations. Meanwhile, a much larger fleet of human ships would approach Kleisen Theta from a completely different vector, appearing out of nowhere, overwhelming the station before the Concorde had a chance to react. The first phase of the operation began as the EDC fleet accelerated toward Kleisen Theta. The Concorde, overconfident in their superiority, took the bait. As predicted, the human fleet drew the Concorde into a wide, dangerous sweep around the outer edge of the system. But what they didn't expect was the sheer unpredictability of the humans' movements. Ships danced through asteroid fields with impossible agility, using every scrap of debris as cover, firing from angles the Concorde couldn't predict. The Concorde returned fire, but their weapons, designed for precise, calculated strikes, only hit empty space or the shields of decoy ships. Humanity had once again turned the tables. Instead of a clean battle, the Concorde was caught in an unpredictable mess of explosions, decoys, and strategic misdirection. Meanwhile, a second fleet of human ships, previously hidden in the shadows of nearby moons, surged toward Kleisen Theta. The Concorde's command station was underestimating humanity's tactics, assuming the first phase was nothing more than a diversion. But this was no diversion. The human forces descended on the station with ferocity, launching surprise strikes from every direction. The human ships, equipped with modified Concorde technology and weapons that had been scavenged and re-engineered, battered the station's defenses. A series of calculated sabotage efforts saw the station's communications array disabled, leaving Kleisen Theta blind and unable to coordinate a defense. Without the ability to call in reinforcements or coordinate, the Concorde fleet was left stranded in the outer reaches of the system, too far from the station to intervene. As the battle inside Kleisen Theta's defensive ring intensified, a breakthrough came. A human fighter squadron, made up of mismatched ships ranging from civilian transports to heavily modified warships, punched through a vulnerable gap in the station's perimeter defenses. Inside the station, chaos ensued as sabotage teams infiltrated the command center, causing systemic failures that spread like wildfire. Concorde officers scrambled to restore order, but they could not keep up with the growing tide of human ingenuity and unpredictability. Mbeki, watching the battle unfold, could feel the tide turning. "This is it," she said, a grim smile tugging at her lips. For every carefully calculated move they make, we counter it with chaos. They won't know how to stop us. Hours later, Clysum Theta lay in ruins. The Concorde's once impenetrable stronghold had been reduced to smoldering wreckage, its central command node a shattered husk. The Concorde fleet, stranded and disorganized, was forced to retreat, their formations in tatters. The human forces had not just disrupted the enemy. They had broken the Concorde's entire system of warfare. The cost had been high. Many human ships were lost in the chaos, and the battle had been far from clean. But humanity had delivered a resounding blow, one that echoed across the galaxy. Mbeki stood in the quiet aftermath, looking out at the debris field that was once Clysum Theta. "We've proven something today," she said, voice steady but filled with the weight of victory. "The Concorde is not invincible, and we are not the underdogs anymore." Admiral Zhao walked up beside her, watching the wreckage drift slowly into space. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Mbeki turned to him, a fierce glint in her eye. "It is. The Concorde thought they could control the galaxy with doctrine. Now they'll learn that no one can control humanity's will to fight." The victory at Clysum Theta sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time, humanity had scored a decisive blow against the invincible Concorde. The alien forces, once so confident in their technological superiority, now found themselves reeling from the loss of a critical strategic hub. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical destruction. Humanity had shattered the myth of Concorde invincibility. But as the Concorde fleet limped back to its core systems to regroup, General Mbeki knew they wouldn't stay passive for long. The Concorde was a wounded beast, but it was still a beast, and the retaliation was coming. On Earth, the aftermath of the battle was one of uneasy celebration. There were no grand parades or speeches. Every victory had its cost, and the loss of ships and personnel had been heavy. But in the silence of the command room, with the hum of active holoscreens and the low murmur of strategists working around her, Mbeki understood one thing. Humanity had taken a step forward, but they were far from safe. "We've broken their defenses, General, but they won't stay down for long," Admiral Zhao said, as he studied the latest Concorde fleet movements. His voice was tense, but there was a note of grim satisfaction in it. "The Concorde will rebuild, and they'll come back stronger. We've made an enemy of an entire empire." Mbeki stared at the projections of the Concorde fleet, watching as they withdrew into the depths of space, no longer rushing but calculating, as though they were reconsidering their next move. "They'll come back," she replied, "but they'll come back differently." Humanity had learned a brutal lesson from their first victory. No matter how much they had disrupted the Concorde, the aliens still controlled vast stretches of the galaxy. The Concorde's retaliation would come soon, and it would not be a disorganized, chaotic counterattack like the one they'd faced before. Mbeki understood that the next battle wouldn't be one of surprise, but of endurance. The Concorde's next strike would be methodical, strategic, an attempt to annihilate Earth's hope in a single devastating blow. The question then was how to keep them off balance. "We need to keep them guessing," Mbeki said, pacing the command center. "If we show them we can take a punch, they might pause. We have to take this war to their doorstep. Make them think we're everywhere and nowhere at once." Zhao nodded. "A war of attrition. Guerrilla warfare, but on an interstellar scale. They can't just obliterate every planet they pass without risking their own resources." Mbeki's lips tightened into a determined line. "Exactly. We don't need to win every battle, but we need to be relentless. The Concorde thinks in terms of perfect, efficient strikes. We'll give them no perfect targets. Every engagement will be a chance for them to make mistakes." The first step of this new phase was a series of surprise raids on Concorde supply lines. Small, fast human ships, using the tactics they had perfected on Clysum Theta, would strike at seemingly random targets across Concorde-controlled space. No one could predict where the next hit would come from. A mining colony one day, a fuel depot the next, and each attack would come with a twist. No two would ever look the same. On Earth, Mbiki and Zhao worked closely with the EDC's tech division, re-engineering captured Concord technology for human use. They had learned from their first victory that it wasn't just about hitting hard. It was about hitting fast and with precision, then disappearing into the shadows before the Concord could regroup. The enemy was methodical, their forces vast, but humanity had learned how to disrupt that method, to throw the balance into chaos. "We'll hit their communication arrays first," Mbiki said in one meeting. "Take away their ability to coordinate, isolate their forces, and let them come to us, piece by piece." Zhao was already planning the next series of covert strikes. "We hit their smaller fleets, their supply depots. The larger fleets will have to come in, but they won't know where we are. We'll use every inch of this system to our advantage." As the months passed, the Concord slowly began to lose its hold on the outer colonies. Their forces, stretched thin and disrupted by humanity's guerrilla tactics, found themselves constantly fighting a war they couldn't control. The Concord's doctrine of perfect precision and calculated destruction had been shattered by the unpredictable, relentless human resolve. Yet, despite the chaos, the Concord was not finished, and as Mbeki watched the latest reports filtering in from across the galaxy, she knew that a much larger battle was on the horizon. The Concord would regroup, adapt, and launch their final offensive against Earth. The true test was yet to come. But humanity was ready. And now, they had not only the resolve to survive, but the will to defeat. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Months of skirmishes and sabotage had worn down the Concord, and humanity's unpredictable tactics had begun to turn the tide in ways no one, least of all the alien invaders, had anticipated. But as General Reva Mbiki watched the holoscreens display the latest Concord fleet movements, she knew that the time of small victories was over. The Concord had regrouped, recalibrated, and now, their ultimate weapon was coming. The Fury Strike, a coordinated galaxy-wide offensive meant to annihilate Earth's defenses in a single, overwhelming blow. The stakes had never been higher. Mbiki stood in the war room, the air thick with tension. Beside her, Admiral Zhao studied the data, his expression unreadable. "They're assembling everything they have," he said. "This is it, their final push. We're going to be facing their full might." "Not if we stop them first," Mbiki replied, her voice calm but filled with unwavering resolve. "We've disrupted them for months, but this time, we need to take the fight directly to their heart. The Fury Strike will hit Earth's outer colonies first, but we have the chance to intercept it before they can launch the final phase. This is our moment." In the weeks that followed, Mbiki and her commanders prepared for the most daring move humanity had ever undertaken. They would use everything at their disposal: the covert strike teams, the modified Concord technology, and the guerrilla tactics that had already crippled the enemy. But this time, they were no longer on the defensive. They were going on the offensive. The plan was audacious. The human fleet, still far smaller than the Concords, would infiltrate deep into Concord-controlled space and target their central command station. If they could destroy or disable it, they could cripple the entire Fury Strike offensive, halting the wave of destruction before it ever reached Earth. It was a gamble with everything on the line, but it was the only chance they had to prevent the annihilation of everything they had fought for. "Once we get past their outer defenses, we have one shot," Mbiki explained to her assembled commanders. "If we fail, Earth won't survive. But if we succeed, we stop the Fury Strike, and we have a real chance of ending this war. This is it. We take the fight to the heart of their empire." The room fell silent as the weight of the mission sank in. Zhao spoke first, his voice steady. "We'll have to rely on speed and unpredictability. We get in, strike fast, and get out. The moment we're spotted, we're done. Our only advantage is that they still don't know what to expect from us." Mbiki nodded. "Exactly. We move like shadows. We're not here for glory. We're here to win. The human fleet set off under the cover of darkness, slipping through asteroid fields and using gravity wells to hide their approach. Every ship was a shadow, moving with an eerie silence that even the Concorde's advanced detection systems struggled to pick up. Their target was a fortified station in the heart of Concorde space, a nexus from which the Fury strike would be commanded. If they could take it down, they would cripple the entire operation. For days, the fleet moved, carefully avoiding Concorde patrols and laying low. Every decision had to be calculated. One misstep, and it would all be over. Finally, the fleet reached the outskirts of the Concorde station, a towering structure surrounded by a web of defensive satellites and advanced weaponry. It was a fortress, and it was the nerve center for the final assault. The humans were here, and the clock was ticking. General Mbiki surveyed the battlefield, her mind racing as the first wave of human ships launched their attack. It was a desperate, high-risk strike, designed to draw attention away from the main assault. At the same time, teams of sabotage experts infiltrated the station, planting explosives on key infrastructure points and disabling its critical systems. The Concorde, still underestimating humanity's ability to adapt, scrambled to counter the unpredictable onslaught. But the human fleet was relentless. With each hit, they disrupted the station's defensive grid, causing the Concorde command to lose coordination. The station's once impenetrable shields flickered, the vulnerabilities exposed for the first time in years. "This is it," Mbeki muttered to herself, eyes fixed on the holoscreen. The final gambit was in motion. Now they had to see it through. As the hours wore on, the humans fought with everything they had. The Concorde's forces, once the epitome of control, were now reacting in desperation. Their ships scrambled to defend their command center, but the humans were everywhere, striking with speed and precision, never giving the Concorde a chance to regain their footing. The Concorde's command node was within reach. If they could breach it and destroy the entire complex, they would bring an end to the Fury strike, and perhaps the war itself. With one final push, a series of explosives tore through the heart of the station, sending shockwaves through the command network. The systems went dark. The Fury strike was halted. Mbeki exhaled, a quiet relief washing over her. The human fleet had won this round. But the war was far from over. The explosion that ripped through the Concorde command station sent shockwaves through the galaxy. As the dust settled in the wreckage of what had been their central hub, the Concorde fleet was thrown into disarray. The Fury strike was halted, but not without consequences. The damage was far-reaching, and its repercussions echoed through every corner of Concorde-controlled space. Back on Earth, the War Council watched as the first signs of Concorde retreat flickered across their monitors. They had done the impossible. Humanity had disrupted the final offensive, and the tide of war had shifted in their favor. But General Mbeki knew better than anyone. The Concorde were a wounded animal, and when cornered, even the most dangerous predators fought with a ferocity that could tear down entire empires. "Victory, but we're not done yet," Mbeki said, her voice calm but filled with an unshakable resolve. "The Concorde will come after us with everything they've got. We've only given ourselves a temporary reprieve." Admiral Zhao, standing beside her, clenched his fists. "They won't stop. But this time, we're not just defending. We're going on the offensive. This is our chance to hit them where it hurts." Mbeki nodded. "Exactly. We've shown them that we can break their strategies. Now we need to break their will." The destruction of the command station had dealt a devastating blow to the Concorde's centralized command structure. Without it, their fleets struggled to maintain coordination. Fleets that had once been a seamless, synchronized force were now fragmented, each fleet operating independently, vulnerable to human raids and guerrilla attacks. Mbeki's forces exploited this weakness, launching rapid strikes on Concorde supply lines, targeting communications relays, and disabling key infrastructure across their empire. But as the human forces took the fight to the Concorde, a new challenge emerged. The Concorde's central leadership, furious and desperate, began mobilizing a fleet of its most advanced warships, the Apex Legion. These ships were equipped with the latest in Concord technology, with shields capable of withstanding the most powerful human weapons and weapons designed to annihilate entire fleets with pinpoint accuracy. The Apex Legion was the Concord's final answer, their ultimate weapon. Mbiki, looking over the new intelligence reports, knew that this would be the true test. "We've pushed them to the edge," she said to Zhao, who stood beside her, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But we're going to need everything we've learned, and more, to face the Apex Legion. They won't fall easily." Zhao agreed. The Apex Legion isn't just an enemy fleet, it's a statement. They're coming to crush us once and for all. The Apex Legion moved like a storm through the outer rim, a wall of destruction that none could hope to withstand. The sheer power of their weapons turned entire colonies into ashes, and they advanced toward Earth's final defense line with terrifying precision. Mbiki's fleet, now battle-hardened but vastly outnumbered, prepared for the ultimate confrontation. The final confrontation would not be on Earth, but in the deep void of space, where no reinforcements could reach them. Humanity's plan was simple: strike at the heart of the Apex Legion with everything they had, using every unconventional tactic they had honed over the past year. They had the advantage of unpredictability. The Concord were the masters of efficiency and technology, but the humans had learned how to exploit chaos and misdirection. And now, they would use it against their greatest enemy. Mbiki addressed her fleet for what could be the final time. "We've come a long way from where we started. What we're up against now is the enemy's last hope. Their Apex Legion is their best, but we are better. We fight with everything we have. We fight for every soul on Earth, for every man, woman, and child. This is not just a fight for survival anymore. It's a fight for the future of humanity." The fleet, though outnumbered, responded with an explosive cheer. There was no more fear, no more hesitation. They were ready to face the enemy, not as underdogs, but as the true heirs of the galaxy. As the Apex Legion approached, the humans launched their final offensive. Each ship in the human fleet knew their role, their attack, and their exit strategy. They would fight like they had never fought before, with the full fury of every battle they had ever won, and every battle they had lost. The battle began in a storm of fire, with humanity's ships darting in and out of Concord fire like phantoms, hitting where the Concord least expected. For every well-aimed shot the Concord made, humanity had a dozen more, each strike designed to confuse, disorient, and cripple the Legion's formation. It was the culmination of everything they had learned: the unpredictable chaos, the relentless drive, the human resolve. And then, as the battle raged on, a moment of truth arrived. The flagship of the Apex Legion, a massive, indomitable warship known as the Judicator, loomed ahead, its weapons primed to annihilate anything in its path. Humanity's final strike would be against this behemoth. The Judicator was the last obstacle to Earth's survival, and Mbiki knew that in this final clash, everything would be decided. This section builds toward the final showdown with the Concord's ultimate weapon, the Apex Legion. The humans, fully embracing their chaotic and unpredictable tactics, faced the most advanced fleet the Concord has ever assembled. This marks the beginning of the end, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Let me know if you'd like to explore any part further or adjust the direction of the story. The Judicator loomed larger with every passing second, its weapon systems glowing like the eyes of a predator, waiting for its prey. The entire Apex Legion had been drawn into the trap, scattered across the battlefield by the relentless human onslaught. The once pristine order of the Concord had been shattered, their fleets ragged, disorganized, and struggling to keep pace with the human unpredictability. But now the Judicator stood as the last line of defense, a fortress capable of obliterating entire worlds with a single volley. General Mbiki stood at the command console of the Courage, her fingers steady as she scanned the battle ahead. Every moment, Every decision could be the difference between victory and extinction. The odds were still stacked against them, but the human fleet had one thing the Apex Legion didn't. They had learned to fight with everything they had. They had learned to survive. "Admiral Zhao," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "this is our moment. We're going to hit them where it hurts. We take the Judicator out, and the rest of their fleet will fall apart. Everything depends on this." Zhao, standing beside her, nodded grimly. "It's all or nothing now." The Judicator's guns charged, and the battle intensified in an instant. The first barrage of weapons fired from the massive warship tore through space, but humanity's fleet was already moving, dodging, and weaving through the storm of fire. The Concorde fleet, now desperate, attempted to concentrate their firepower, but it was too late. The humans had mastered the art of unpredictability. Every ship, every fighter, moved with the precision of chaos itself, darting in and out of the Apex Legion's firing arcs, hitting targets in ways the Concorde could not anticipate. At the heart of the chaos, the Courage led the charge. The flagship, with its hull scarred from previous battles, surged forward, its weapons blazing. Mbiki's voice came through the fleet-wide comms. "We move fast. We hit hard. We finish this." The human ships closed in, drawing near the Judicator with deadly intent. A strike force of small, agile fighters, their hulls designed for speed and stealth, flanked the massive warship. They wove through fire, dodging the Concorde's defensive systems, and in one swift, coordinated maneuver, planted explosive charges along the Judicator's lower hull. These were no ordinary explosives. They had been crafted from the very weapons and technology the humans had scavenged from Concorde wreckage, designed to bypass the Judicator's formidable shields. As the charges detonated, the Judicator's shield system began to flicker, sending waves of disruption throughout the entire fleet. The warship staggered, its once impenetrable defenses cracking under the assault. For the first time in the battle, the Concorde forces faltered. The Judicator was no longer invulnerable. Mbiki seized the opportunity. "All ships, full assault on the Judicator. No hesitation. We end this now." The Courage and its remaining fleet surged forward with unrelenting fury. The Concorde's defensive formations were already in disarray, and now their flagship was vulnerable. Human ships poured fire into the Judicator, targeting every weak point revealed by the initial explosions. With every strike, the warship's hull cracked further, its weapons systems sputtering and failing. In the heart of the battle, Mbiki's eyes narrowed as the Judicator finally began to crumble. Its weapons fired wildly, attempting to retaliate, but the human ships had already closed the gap. A final decisive blow came from the Courage itself, the flagship's main cannon firing a concentrated burst of energy directly into the exposed core of the Judicator. The explosion rocked space itself, a violent flash of light that swallowed the enemy warship whole. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The rest of the Apex Legion, now without their command ship and disoriented by the destruction, began to fall apart. With the Judicator gone, their coordination was lost, and the remaining ships, no longer able to function as a cohesive force, became easy targets. The human fleet, battered but victorious, tore through the remaining Concorde forces with relentless precision. Hours later, in the aftermath of the battle, the silence of space was deafening. The once formidable Apex Legion was no more. The remaining Concorde forces, disoriented and leaderless, retreated in disarray. The final blow to their empire had been struck. On the Courage, General Mbiki stood before her crew, the exhaustion of the battle evident on her face, but replaced by the quiet pride of victory. "We did it. Not because we were stronger, not because we had better weapons, but because we never stopped fighting. We never stopped believing we could win. This is just the beginning of our future." Zhao, standing beside her, nodded. "The Concorde will never forget this day, and neither will we." Mbeki looked out at the stars, knowing the war was far from over. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself a moment of peace. Humanity had faced the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known, and against all odds, they had won. The galaxy had learned the truth. None could resist the power of the human resolve. This final part delivers the climactic conclusion, with humanity's victory over the Apex Legion, marking the end of the Concord's dominance and the beginning of a new era for the galaxy. It's a hard-won triumph, one earned through persistence, ingenuity, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments or further exploration of the story.